Thank you, My mic on? Hello? Thank you, everyone, and welcome. This House believes that the power of tech giants is harmful for society. We will have teams representing the proposition and the opposition on both sides. During each speech, audience members will have the opportunity to choose whether to accept this, or equally, they can decline this call and move on with their speech. After we've heard from Lakshika, the second opposition speaker, there will be an opportunity for 6 audience members to make short 2-minute speeches. I encourage anyone and everyone to think about what they have to say and use this moment as an incredible opportunity to address your fellow honorary Oxford Union members. Please stay seated after the last speaker presents. There will be a few important updates from our judges who will be announcing their decisions. Our esteemed judges today are Professor Rupert Younger, who is the Professor for Reputation and Leadership and Social Purpose here at Said Business School, and Steve New, the esteemed Professor of Operations and Corporate Turnaround here at Oxford as well. You will also be casting your vote with your feet based on which door you walk out of. So think of yourself right now as a blank slate and open your mind to the arguments of both teams. And with that, I would like to introduce Kyle Nuss, our first proposition speaker from Green Templeton College, to start our debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great honor. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Capstone Debate. It's such an honor to be here in front of my friends and their families in this historic venue, the Oxford Union. As first proposition speaker, it is my duty to introduce the opposition, my opposing speakers. We start off with Lakshika Trika. Lakshika worked in the nonprofit prior to the MBA and has spoken many times about the benefits of working in the public sector. If her arguments seem a little unconvincing, it's because deep down she's a good person and wishes she was speaking for the proposition. Next up, we have Alice Truswell. Alice is from Australia, so I find it a little weird that she's so keen on the benefits of technology, given that the biggest technological export from Australia has been the didgeridoo. Most Aussies think the G in 4G stands for "G'day, mate." Accents aren't my thing. Next up, we have David Graham. David is famous in the MBA and in the Oxford Union for playing devil's advocate, a role he is very good at. And in the hundreds of times he's done this in classes, never once grown incredibly tiresome. David is a big fan of technology, using the messaging app Telegram to scan for the pub crawl so he can come join for a drink. And finally, we have Cassandra. Cassandra was student body vice president in her undergraduate institution. She was the consultant at Deloitte before coming to the MBA, because of course she was. Go figure, the platinum blonde from America would have the most generic MBA background imaginable. Cassandra is also very passionate about technology, using her Instagram profile to inundate her friends and followers with hundreds of photos of her cats. Together, they form the opposition, a formidable group. And if David and Cassandra's rocky working relationship up to this point is any indication, I'm sure the preparation for this debate went incredibly smoothly. The proposition believes the power of the tech giants is harmful for society. When we examine that statement, it's important to understand what we mean by the tech giants. The tech giants are the tech companies that have grown to such a scale and a size that they have a major impact on the society and how we interact with each other. Examples of this include Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, and so forth. These companies have become ingrained in our day-to-day existence. They are such an inescapable part of our lives, it's often easy to just forget how dependent on them we really are. For example, many of us throughout the course of this debate will pull out our Apple phones to check Facebook and Instagram when I start to drone on for too long. Later, we'll use Google Maps to find our way back to our hotel. We'll pop on Netflix and watch that rerun of The Office for the 10th time. These companies are part of our day-to-day existence, and they have a big influence on our lives. With that influence comes a tremendous amount of power and wealth. These companies generate hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue every year. Just to get a sense of how much money, how financially successful these companies are, I have an example. Apple has over $200 billion of cash on hand sitting in a bank account. For comparison's sake, that is as much as the entire economic output as the whole country of New Zealand. With this money, these companies can buy influence in Congress and other world governments, lobbying to change laws to how they like. They can buy out competition to maintain their borderline monopolies. In addition to the financial wealth that these companies have, they have almost unregulated access to our information, a whole wealth of data. Every time we use these apps and these services is another data point that gets fed into their algorithm to the point where they know more about us than we may even know about ourselves. Armed with this financial wealth and this wealth of data, these tech CEOs are some of the most powerful people on the planet. Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, is inarguably one of the most famous and powerful men in the world. More so even than many, if not most, of sovereign heads of state. And this dynamic has a big impact on our society, our businesses, our citizens, and our governments. The opposition will bedazzle you with the benefits of technology and all the flashy things that we do. And there is no denying that the benefits of technology are numerous. The convenience and productivity brought to us by them is unquestioned. We, the proposition, believe, however, the unchecked power, not the technology that these companies have, is incredibly harmful for society. For example, Netflix, a tech giant, has repeatedly shown to be irresponsible, repeatedly giving money to Adam Sandler to make terrible, terrible movies. If the pure existence of murder mystery and Sandy Wexler isn't enough to convince you that big tech is a menace to society, I don't know what's going to do it. In seriousness, the negative effects of these companies is numerous. There's the economic downside of having these huge companies that contribute to income inequality. They're so powerful that they do not pay taxes. They can move things around in their accounting things to effectively not pay taxes so that society doesn't get the benefit of the redistribution of wealth that they are owed. There is a big impact on our privacy. Our data is for sale. These companies use our information and sell them to advertisers and political campaigns to get us to buy things we don't need and vote for people who won't represent us. All the while giving us, setting us up to be the victim of hackers and data breaches with some of our most sensitive information. And overall, there's also the social behavior that these companies have influence on. These are the things that these companies have the power to change, but deliberately choose not to. Things like the environment of dependency and addiction that we have to some of our online platforms. And there's the rise in cyberbullying, and with it, the teen suicide rates that come with it. Also, there are the echo chambers that these online communities can create. People online spewing misinformation back and forth at each other until they create this artificial online reality that is indistinguishable from the real world. For example, the Flat Earth Society resulted from YouTube algorithm continually showing conspiracy videos until there's a whole swath of people that actually believe the Earth is flat. And while that is funny to us that know better, that line of thinking leads to much more harmful effects like the anti-vaccine movement, where we are subjected to previously eradicated diseases, which is unquestionably a harmful effect on society. So in conclusion, the tech giants, no one is arguing that the tech giants do not have a benefit to society through their technology. However, the power and the unchecked power at that these companies have amassed along the way is incredibly harmful for society. And with that, we urge the audience to vote in the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. And now I look to Lakshika Trika of Green Templeton College to open for the opposition.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As leader of the opposition, I'm here to argue against the motion that the power of tech giants is harmful for society. Right at the outset, I'd like you to take a minute to picture a weighing scale. And keep in mind that the opposition is not arguing against keeping the power of big tech companies in check or denying that there are concerns associated with their growth. but that in all aspects considered, on balance, these firms have done and have the potential to do much more good than harm for society. Our arguments will fall into three broad categories: their contribution as innovators, their commitment to social good, and the agency of the consumer to ultimately determine their trajectory. But before we get started, please allow me to introduce you to the illustrious speakers in favor of the proposition. Just as one cannot imagine the Beatles without Ringo Starr, there would be no That's What She Said without our beloved drummer Kyle Nuss, who you just heard from. As admirable as that may be, everyone knows that the difference between a drummer and a savings bond is that a savings bond will eventually mature and make money. However, I would also like to recognize Kyle's new hair, new confidence, Bradley Cooper vibe. So perhaps the finance lectures did teach him something about maturing after all. This makes him one of the most eligible bachelors in our cohort, although to be fair, he didn't have much competition to begin with. Next, we have Mina. Mina is a busy, independent woman without much time for other people unless she's in need of the Wi-Fi password, requests that are usually met with radio silence on Telegram. But no, in all seriousness, her tough demeanor has truly helped inspire women in our class to ask for what they deserve. Once when a classmate asked her to teach her the secrets to her success, she responded, "I don't know, have your parents be diplomats." So we expect her to be particularly diplomatic today. The third speaker will be Arjun, not to be confused with the many other Arjuns in our cohort. This is the one without the glasses and without the baby that we know of. You may also recognize him as part of the team that participated in the union debate against Cambridge, which I need to remind you we lost. He's one of the most kindest, good-natured people in our class, so we know he'll take it graciously when you vote against him today again. The final speaker will be Sandeep, who, as most of us know, will be joining McKinsey very soon in the fall. Today is great practice for him in making convincing recommendations based on minimal research and then simply walking away. But the truth is, none of us have any idea what Sandeep is going to bring to the table because he's known to never attend meetings or reveal his secrets beforehand. So I'm sure his team will be just as surprised as we are to hear what he has to say. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, esteemed judges, it is truly difficult to think of any other sector that has been more consistently innovative than what we call big tech. The competitive dynamics of Silicon Valley, supported by strong institutions, have allowed smart, hard-working entrepreneurs to rise and to flourish. Many of these tech giants are in a market-leading position today because they found ways to provide products and services that we couldn't dream of living without, and have significantly improved the standards of living of billions of people around the world. It's hard to live in life without Amazon same-day delivery, for example, or the seamless integration between our Apple devices and Google applications. These small, time-saving improvements have bolstered our productivity and freed us to spend time on more creative, intellectually challenging pursuits. We need to support and not stifle their continued potential for innovation in the future, and recognize that the competitive dynamics of the industry will allow the current giants to be replaced if they fail to keep pace. Like all corporations, tech giants are facing the important questions of embedding purpose into their core value proposition. And particularly as MBA students at Said, we understand the historical importance of free market principles in tandem with a commitment to corporate responsibility to elevate global standards of living. Evidence suggests that tech giants have done this much better than companies in other sectors. They're at the cutting edge of research and technology, a mandate that they do not take lightly. For example, Google, by way of Alphabet, has taken a lead role in developing self-driving vehicles and the underlying artificial intelligence, making the concept more publicly acceptable, an initiative that could potentially save many lives down the road. Another impressive example is Alphabet's Project Loon, which uses high-altitude balloons to provide internet access in remote areas. After Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico, Project Loon was deployed to restore internet access very swiftly. I could continue listing many more examples of their bold attempts to create better and more connected living situations for some of the world's most vulnerable people. And you'll hear more from our team later on some of the deep impact of the social movements that were started on social media. There's certainly potential for them to take on much more in this space, but there's no doubt that big tech does not shy away from recognizing and acting upon their responsibility to the public beyond generating profit. Having said that, we cannot lose sight of the fact that as consumers, we are not at the mercy of corporations, despite the hype and fear-mongering. We very much have the agency to make choices that will determine the performance of the firms that we are discussing. Ultimately, our ability to overcome important issues in civil society is not going to depend on the size or influence of a company. It's going to depend on the educated choices of individuals and the values of our communities. It is individual awareness and a public conversation, such as this one, that's going to build the immunity of our social fabric and help us demand more from the companies that we engage with. Now, there are legitimate privacy concerns that apply to big technology companies that have already been highlighted in the debate. And we are at an important juncture in this conversation, and it remains an ongoing negotiation as companies, regulators, and society are developing new norms. But let's think twice before we attempt to take down the actors that are endowed with the best resources and most capable human capital in the world in this field, and are therefore best positioned to come up with viable solutions that will benefit all of us in the long run. Polling has shown that 70% of Americans feel that Amazon, Apple, and Google are the safest place for their data. And after watching the thoroughly cringeworthy cross-examination of Mark Zuckerberg by Congress, I'm not surprised at all. The subsequent speakers from the opposition will elaborate further on this critical question of trust and where it should lie. In the last few minutes, I've argued that innovations from big tech have made our lives incredibly efficient, that they have taken seriously the task of embedding corporate purpose into their DNA, and that we as consumers must not forget that we retain the agency to make choices that will determine the continued success of tech giants, and indeed the direction of civilization at large. Let's think critically, ladies and gentlemen, and remember that weighing scale, and vote in opposition to the motion, because on balance, it's clear that tech giants do more good than harm for society.
I thank Lakshika, and now look to Meena Katak from Green Templeton College to speak for the proposition.
Thank you, Lakshika, for that riveting yet somewhat irrelevant speech. I want to start by saying I always get my Wi-Fi passwords. They just PM me. And I want to start by reminding the audience that this is not a debate about whether technology is harmful for society or whether innovation is harmful for society. The proposition believes that it is. So I think it's fantastic that Deliveroo gets chicken nuggets to my door in an hour. That's fine. What we're trying to say is that the fact that unchecked power exists in the hands of a few technology giants is harmful for society. And let me define this power for you now. Google has a 94% market share on search engines worldwide. Next, we have 2 billion Facebook users, and we have 5 billion videos watched on YouTube every single day. And essentially, these companies control the flow of information, and they can use this control to influence your purchasing decisions, your voting decisions, as well as the exposure you have to the outside community in general. And this kind of influence, unchecked, is harmful for society. The next thing I'd like to refute is this concept that the platform is not at fault. It's people's choices that are bad. Do we really have choice in this anti-competitive status quo? Today, it's impossible for a company to enter the market, and ever since Facebook gained 1 billion users in 2012, Snapchat and Instagram are the only companies that gained scale, and one of them is now owned by Facebook. So if we live in a world where access to economic and social opportunities exist on these handful of platforms, do we have the choice to opt out and not participate? The second thing I want to discuss is that these technologies are incredibly addictive, so it's difficult for us to monitor our choices. For example, a user would use their phone 56 times a day and spend 2.5 hours on social media. 5 if you're David Graham trying to campaign for the Oxford Union, that's fine. The point is that human beings are not very good at self-regulating, which is why we have governments to protect us. And there are famous examples of this, say tobacco. the tobacco industry needed government intervention by means of heavy taxes and a ban on advertisement so that people would stop smoking. Having said that, I'd like to introduce two new arguments into this debate to really convince you that the power of these big technology giants is harmful for society. The first is data and privacy. These companies are making money by collecting all of your data and selling it. And what's scary about that is they can do it and have no checks on what they're using that data for. Governments are very bad and very slow at keeping pace with regulation, and if anybody has seen Mark Zuckerberg's hearings, we know that governments have no idea how technology companies operate, and even if they did, these companies, these tech giants, are spending unprecedented levels on lobbying every single year, meaning they essentially have the power to write the legislation that keeps the status quo and will not endorse any regulation that will change their data manipulating business model in any meaningful way. The opposition mentioned how tech giants are aware of this and they're trying to solve the problem. But is there not an inherent conflict of interest with institutions that capitalize on your data being trusted with responsible data management? I certainly think there is. So right now, your data is being used, you're being profiled, and you're being thrown with information that is influencing outcomes, and this can be incredibly dangerous. For example, in 2016, Facebook targeted, campaign ads to a focused set of users to influence the 2016 US presidential election as well as Brexit. Facebook has also been known to run randomized control trials to try to influence depression. And it turns out that little tweaks to your newsfeed has very real psychological impacts. And users aren't able to really give consent in any meaningful way because the uses of this data change so rapidly. So, now the US uses Facebook as an immigration check. I'm not sure how effective this is because Lakshika recently got hers and there's some wild things on her Facebook. But regardless, if I had known that when I signed up, maybe I wouldn't have signed up. So the point about data and privacy is that data is powerful and it's being used to shape global outcomes. And this power should rest in the hands of the people through an elected government that has the mandate to protect and serve, not the mandate to reap profits for investors. And the last argument I want to bring to the audience to convince you that these tech giants are powerful in a harmful way is that there's economic harm to society as well by means of tax avoidance. And the opposition is going to tell you that every large corporation tries to avoid taxes, and it's true. But these large tech giants are uniquely positioned to do it very effectively and consistently because oftentimes their product is software that can be made anywhere in the world and sold instantly globally, making it very easy to shift profits around and maneuver accounting loopholes. For example, Apple paid 5% taxes last year when the corporate tax rate is 25%, and Amazon famously paid absolutely zero tax, even though they had over $11 billion of profit in 2018. And the effects of this is felt by the common person, by way of having understaffed hospitals, underfunded schools, and deteriorating roads and bridges. And just so you understand the magnitude of the problem, Apple and Amazon independently are larger than 130 of the world's countries. So we experience serious repercussions when they subvert the rules. So all this goes to say that as you listen to the rest of the debate, the proposition encourages you not to be bedazzled by the wonders of innovation and technology, which we do not dispute and we fully encourage. But it's important to be deliberate about who we trust with power. And we have proved and established that big technology companies have abused this power in the past and will continue to do so in the future unless elected governments step up and take action. Thank you.
I thank Mina, and now I look to Alice Trustwell of Balliol College for the opposition.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. At this point, we're getting close to halfway through the debate, and thus the bulk of the proposition's argument has been stated, which currently seems to hinge on two things: data privacy and use, and this so-called unchecked power of tech giants. They have not shown us why these tech giants cause more harm than good. And I will weave direct rebuttal to those points into my speech, through which I will explain three key arguments. Firstly, why it is a good thing for tech giants to be the ones without data. Secondly, why consumers still have the ultimate control over the success of the tech giants. And thirdly, the critical role that tech giants have in enabling and advancing our society that we would not want to give up. I hope to illustrate that the good that tech giants do outweighs any detriments associated with them, which the proposition have raised. But I will secure your vote for the opposition. Now, the proposition seemed to suggest that the greatest harm caused by tech giants today is the potential of data privacy and usage violations. But ladies and gentlemen, tech giants are not the only ones collecting your data. Everyone has it. From your internet provider to that weird dating site you signed up for 10 years ago in a moment of desperation, to perhaps the end of course evaluation surveys, if anyone filled them in other than JJ. And nor are tech giants the only ones selling it. Banks, phone companies, supermarkets, all collect revenue from selling our data. We live in a data economy. And given this context, the opposition believe that the existence of tech giants, working within the realm of well-considered but not stifling government regulation, presents a strong model. And we are yet to see an alternate model brought up by the proposition. These companies have proven through advancements in cloud computing and storage, billions spent on cybersecurity, and leading the charge on considering things like the ethics of AI, that they respect data and the responsibility and power that come with it. Consequently, they have not been at the centre of the most life-damaging data breaches of our time, such as the NSA or, say, Ashley Madison. And not only do they understand data, they are also doing good with it. Looking at mental health on Facebook to progress research into this area is a positive thing. And if they didn't have the scale that they have, they wouldn't be able to do it. 1/3 of total data generated worldwide comes from the healthcare industry, narrowly beating that created by our class Telegram group. And with this data, Apple has found ways to recognize early signs of cardiac arrest, while Alphabet's DeepMind has enabled the early diagnosis of acute kidney injury. Discoveries in our best interests. Which leads me to my second point. If we felt that these companies no longer represented our best interests, consumers would stop using them, just as we have before. The proposition has argued that these companies have too much power and influence, but they seem to be confusing mass use with mass control. The power of tech giants is granted to them by us, and it can be taken away by us, just as it was for Nokia, BlackBerry, Yahoo. As soon as we believed they did not bring net benefit over other options, we stopped using them. My final point is this. The connections and voice that these platforms provide to many is democratizing and advancing our society, not damaging it. These platforms have allowed for greater and more efficient movement of goods, information, and communication. Now, Kyle spoke specifically to social media, in particular echo chambers and cyberbullying, issues that should not be downplayed. However, they do not outweigh the platform that these companies have provided for individuals to access new markets and, crucially, for people to raise their voice and to band together to speak out and influence the future of our society. The Me Too hashtag was shared 19 million times. An issue that was whispered about in the corridors of workplaces for decades was given a forum via social media. It has now received support, and perpetrators of these issues have been punished. So, while I do of course worry too about how we protect our children from the harm of social media or make sure that their private information stays that way, I would rather handle those challenges than tell those same children that we were the ones so afraid of tech giants that we stifled how they helped us with social movement, and we stopped the companies who were leading the fastest acceleration of innovation that the world has seen. Thank you.
I thank Alice and now look to Arjun Balongdi of St. Catherine's College for the proposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This debate is not about whether we should stop technology companies from existing, right? I think that last line that Alice spoke of, we're not proposing that they should stop existing. Our burden is very clear. Our burden is to prove that the magnitude of their power is in fact harmful for society, right? And so we're not saying let them not exist. We're saying, or like trying to characterize for you how harmful that is. In my speech, I'm going to be rebutting what Alice said. But more so, I'm going to be extending the case from side proposition. One, I'm going to talk specifically about the behavioral influence that these big tech giants have on us and how they're affecting us negatively and how that's negatively affecting society in turn. But more so, I'm going to be talking about regulation. And this is very important because you have the likes of Google, etc., that are setting up large policy teams because the government hasn't been able to step up and provide them or play that role over and tell them what's right and what's wrong. And these policy teams in themselves are going in and saying, well, we're going to tell the government how or what the rule of law should be within the technology sector. And that's essentially what the problem is when they have all these billions of data points that Kyle and Meena have spoken about. But before that, some rebuttal, right? First, Alice said, everyone else has your data. Well, yes, everyone else has your data, but that doesn't shirk the responsibility of these big companies like Facebook, like Netflix, like Google, that have pretty much every data point on where you go, what you do, etc., right? She just spoke of Google Maps telling you how to be here, etc. And that's essentially the problem of it, is we don't think that if banking institutions also have the data, that it's okay that, you know, the likes of Google, Facebook, etc. do as well. But more so, she spoke of data breaches. And it's not really the problem of whether this data is exposed to the real world, right? The problem really is about, given they have all of these data points on you, what can they do with those data points, right? And that's essentially what we're going to be talking about when we speak of things like behavioral influences. But furthermore, she said, well, you know, maybe tomorrow they won't have the commercial clout that they needed, and we will stop using them. No, the whole idea of Google was predicated on the fact that you could create a free email account. You could download Google Maps for free that could tell you to go everywhere, right? There is no contingency on the commercial success of these companies, even though that is the precise thing that is making them so powerful today, is the fact that they essentially have that clout on you, even though they're not, well, really selling you anything. And so there is no real opt-out mechanism of these services, is there? Because essentially, if you have to use email, you're going to use Outlook on Microsoft, or maybe you're going to use Gmail, right? And that's the idea, is because there's no opt-out mechanism, and because there's no commercial sort of attractability, the idea is that there's no incentive for people to stop using them. Mind you, we're talking about billions and billions of people, no. But the idea is that even within behavioral influence, and this is what our first substantive idea is. I'll take you in a minute, Cassandra. And this sort of directly clashes with their idea on mental health. We say that with the power that they possess, big tech companies are influencing the behavior, our behavior, to maximize the time that you end up spending on their products. Ever thought why you're just checking your phone when there's, well, nothing on it? Ever thought why you're just like watching Netflix, well, just for the heck of it on a Saturday for hours and hours together? And why is this a problem? Because of the whole concept of addiction, right? Because the idea is that when you are doing or carrying out these things that are just so subconsciously ingrained within you, that there is a high likelihood for you to be addicted to these platforms, right? And why is that a problem in itself? Because we understand that addiction has strong correlations with things like depression, something that Meena spoke about. The moment you have like billions of people that are exposed to things like mental health issues as dire as depression, we think that's antithetical and harmful to society in itself. But more importantly, the regulation argument, and this is important, because we say the technology boom has ensured that the government hasn't really been able to catch up with being that sort of body that looks over these companies and tells them what's right and what's wrong. We say that these tech giants have built the magnitude of power, something that Kyle and Meena spoke about incessantly. We say that the power today exists in a highly unregulated scenario, and what happens when policy teams of Google are set up is that they get to set the rule of law within the tech sector themselves. With every data point that I've highlighted in my speech that they own of you, principles that are fundamental to why society in itself was formed, principles like privacy, principles like choice. When those in itself are no longer within your jurisdiction of whether you can access them, that violates the very concept of society. And because as a result of this behavioral influence, because as a result of the regulation that they themselves are creating as a rule of law, I'm very proud to propose.
Thank you, Arjun. And now I would look to David Graham of the opposition. I look to David Graham of St. John's College of the opposition. Oh gosh, guys.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just clarify I'm in opposition to the motion. Right. We've heard some fantastic comments from the proposition, and thankfully they've made their position quite clear on many things. I'd just like to come back to something that my good friend Arjun said earlier. He said quite clearly, we're not proposing to stop them. Okay, what are you proposing? Because that's really not clear. We can complain about harms, we can imagine all kinds of things, and we can point to real risks and real harms. What are you proposing to do? We recognize that there are harms. We think on balance the benefits are better. Right. We've heard, broadly speaking, from proposition about the power of tech giants and how they cause harm. And they've pretty much identified three kinds of harm, which Arjun was kind enough to help lay out. They can broadly be summarized as economic, privacy harm, and behavioral. Right, economic. They've talked about not paying taxes. As Meena very kindly pointed out, this is not a tech company issue. It's a global company issue. The world has globalized, and as usual, governments are behind the curve. There's a very strong argument to be made that global companies have too many options when it comes to their tax planning. Whether you agree with that or not, that's something that world leaders are working on right now. And it's true that intellectual property is a big part of that. It crosses borders more easily. This is not unique to tech. Almost any big company that you know of has their brand in a brand co, somewhere where they pay less taxes, and most of their profits go there. If you don't like that, the good news is that the world is working on this. It's not a tech issue, though. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that aside. We heard some fun keywords during some earlier speeches. One of them was, we don't have an opt-out. Okay. Admittedly, a lot of us like these services. We enjoy them a lot. Right. Can anyone here in this room raise their hand if they do not have Facebook? Okay. That number, I don't know if you can see them, but that number is greater than 1. Those people succeeded in doing the impossible and not having a Facebook account. It is not mandatory. Sure, there are great services, but you don't have to have it. And if you don't like it, don't have it. You know what's really easy to opt out of? If you don't want Google Maps to know where you are, you can just turn off sending your location to them. You can even still use the service without telling them where you are. Yeah, go. With regard to that specific article, it sounds like it was during the time I was preparing for this debate, so I haven't read it, I'm afraid. But I think it makes a very good point, because earlier we heard that there are no regulations stopping them from gathering our data. Guess what? If it was illegal, that means there is regulation. They were just ignoring it. What we need is to enforce the existing regulation. Awesome, thanks for your input. It's true that there are legal issues around data management. Sometimes the laws are extremely complicated. We're not pretending that these companies don't make mistakes. We're not pretending there aren't data breaches. We are arguing that it is not unique to the tech giants, as we're calling them, to have data breaches and to make those errors. The good news, as I hear from your article, is that government is on it. They are restricting them, and they're keeping them in line. If Google's been fined that much, that's a great development. And it shows that they don't have enough political power to prevent the fines. Let's talk about privacy. Who here has Alexa or Google Hub or other virtual assistants at home? Raise your hands. Fewer than I think, but okay. Why? Why would you do something like that? You've gone out, you've bought a bugging device and put it in your own home. It's like one of those spy movies where, you know the ones, the guy comes home, he's like, somebody's been in here. He's got his little scanner out, he's like, oh, there's a bug in my phone, there's a bug in the lamp, there's one in my shoe, how did that get there? Oh no. But instead of somebody having slipped into your house while you were at the opera, you went out, you bought the device, you put it in your living room, you programmed it with your credit cards, and you taught your kids to speak to it. Why did you do that? You know, not only have they bugged your house, you paid them for the privilege. What's going on? Well, the fact is, it's convenient, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun to play God in your own house. Alexa, let there be light, and there was light. And for some people, it goes beyond that. It allows them to cope if they, for example, have visual disabilities. They need to order things to their house. It goes beyond that. And what's happened is people have been willing to give up some of their privacy in exchange for a convenient service. That's a choice that they made. And if you don't like that, do what I do. Don't have them. I don't have Apple. I don't like Siri. I don't use the Google Assistant. I've turned off Cortana. I hate those things because they don't give me good services, and I don't like giving up that kind of data. If you want to, that's your choice, and it's fine. Fuck. Oh, I shouldn't have taken the points of information. All right. I'm gonna have to dive forward then and talk about what does political power mean for a company. We heard a few magic words. We heard things like monopoly. We heard that Google has a 94% share of all searches. Wow, that sounds like a lot. The fact is, when we look at tech giants, it's easy to see them as like an amorphous blob that are maybe working in cahoots, and they're all out to take our data and like hold on to it. The fact is they're not. They're very, very different companies, and they're working in fierce competition with one another to try to give us services that we want. Google does have a very high percentage of search on PC, but they do not have a majority of audio search or video search. There's a lot of ways in which they are not leading. They are behind. And any one of these companies is literally one misstep away from collapse, and they know it. That's why they are desperately investing in making the new products of the future, trying to give us what we want. And as soon as we, the customers, woke up and said, hey, privacy is something we want, guess what? Apple's all over it. They're like, oh, right, we'll give you privacy, come to our platform. Google and Facebook are competing to give us those privacy features that we want without hurting the products that we've shown them we actually want, which is responsive search, which is connecting with people that we love. And I'll have to leave it there. But I hope to hear some very interesting interventions from the floor, which come right next. And yeah, vote in the opposition.
I thank David for his remarks. But before we hear from the final proposition and opposition speakers, it's time to hear your thoughts on the motion. If you would like to make a short 2-minute speech, please raise your hand and wait to be called on, and then you'll come grab a microphone from the podium. Yes, the gentleman in front. I look to you as the speaker for the proposition of the motion.
Opposition.
We'll come to you next. Proposition of the motion?
It's great great to be here. Good to hear both sides, the proposition and the opposition. I would like to speak in favor of the proposition today. I think I want to come at this from the angle of marginalization and what these companies have done to traditionally marginalized communities. So we all know that there are already biases that exist in the society that we live in today. But these technology companies like Google, like Facebook, actually amplify this at a scale that we have never seen before. So if you have your phones on you and you Google Asian girls, black girls, you're going to see excessively sexualized pornographic results. This is a way that a lot of people access information. As we just heard, there's a 94% market penetration for Google. So everybody who accesses the internet, that's more than 50% of the world's population, accesses it through Google, and that's what they see when they search for Asian girls or black girls. If you look up professional hairstyles on Google Images, you see overwhelmingly white women. If you look up unprofessional hairstyles, you will overwhelmingly see black women. And so this is something that is already there in our society today, but it is something that is so amplified in the way that we see the world digitally. And so I think these kinds of tech giants, with the monopoly that they have, are really influencing the way that we are accessing information and then what we do with it. We're seeing that through the ads that are pushed through Facebook and so on and so forth. I think one of the questions that was posed was, what can we do about it? And my proposal would be to actually break up these monopolies. So you have one institution, you have Google, that's Google, YouTube, Alphabet, DeepMind, all of them. That's one organization that's holding all of your data. Facebook is Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. That's one organization holding all of your social data. So what can you do about it? You break them up. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for her remarks and now look to the speaker in opposition of the motion.
Right. I would like to address Tulsi's point, by the way. So you did mention that if you type in Asian women or black women into Google, you get overly sexualized results. I would just say that as a man, and I know this, if you type white men into Google, you get pretty much exactly the same thing. So I don't think that it just necessarily marginalizes people of color. Another point I'd like to make, well, this is just human nature. Humans suck. Get over it. But with regards to the power of social media and tech companies, right? They're monopolies now. They weren't always monopolies, okay? MySpace was the biggest social media firm for a long while. They do not exist any longer. Nokia was the biggest mobile communications firm for a long while. They do not exist any longer. We just stopped using their products because they weren't that good, okay? Now, all of these companies are engaged in a big competition to build a better mousetrap. The minute a better one comes along, there goes their monopoly, okay? It's not some kind of government-regulated field where people aren't allowed to innovate, where there are specific rules saying you can do this and you can't do this, and so new entrants can't really come into the market and upstage the existing entrants. There may be monopolies now, but no thank you. And finally, when we talk about the power that these companies have, I think it's worthwhile to see actually how much power they have. Companies get fined, companies get penalized for making missteps. And they also get penalized in the marketplace. We'll just stop buying their products. And finally, when people say that Apple has $200 billion in cash, actually, I just looked up their 10Q. They have $50 billion in cash and $44 billion in short-term marketable securities. So when we're talking about their power and fake news, I think it's important to not use fake news ourselves.
I thank the speaker for his remarks and now look for a speaker in proposition of the motion. Nobody on proposition? This is this side's team? Okay. Anyone in opposition of the motion who would like to speak?
What an entrance, right? Thank you everyone for sharing. Is this on? Yeah. Thank you everyone for sharing both sides of the story. It's given me a lot to think about. I would like to thank Tulsi for bringing up the points about addressing this from a marginalized perspective, because it's made me think about these big tech giants as employers and how they've been able to give us a lot of opportunities to marginalized communities from being such the large businesses that they are. I think about the flexible work hours they've afforded people who require adoption leave or mat leave or pat leave. I think about, in the same vein, how the flexible working circumstances that these big companies allow also allow people to work remotely in areas that are not big metropolitan areas. I think about these companies allowing, pushing forward for women to enter the engineering space and like the technology spaces that are predominantly male-focused or have, traditionally really only opened their doors to men. I think about all the opportunities that they give to people who are queer or don't sit on the sexual spectrum and giving them a voice, a space to talk about their perspective. And I think as employers and as platforms in that sense, these big companies have allowed us to really be a more diverse and exciting world to celebrate. And the nature of that is because they're so big. If they weren't so big, they wouldn't be able to take the chances they do with the employees that they take on. So that's something really to consider. So thank you.
I thank the speaker for their remarks and now look for a final speaker in proposition of the motion. Okay. All right, so now a final speaker in opposition of the motion. Yes, I saw Kevin first. Sorry.
Thanks everybody. To echo the other sentiments, great points made all around. A point that I'd like to make in support of the opposition, and this echoes points that have been made through the debate as well as through some of the floor speeches, is the implication that the harm to society wrought by tech giants necessitates some form of regulation. And I'd like to caution the extent to which regulation creates a barrier to entry that actually entrenches the power of the tech giants. I think tobacco was used as an example earlier in the debate. Rightly so, tobacco companies were harmful to society. The government intervened, banning advertising. But what happened inside of the market? It effectively handed monopoly power to the existing market players. A new entrant would necessarily need to advertise to compete, and so, thus, tobacco stocks have been a safe, steady investment for decades. Likewise, regulating the tech companies would require some kind of institutional apparatus inside of the tech company. Facebook, with billions in the bank, can afford to do this. They can do the R&D. They can hire full-time employees or freelance. They can do whatever it takes to regulate internally. A startup could not create a business and meet those compliance standards at the same time. So, and I'm not saying that regulation can't be successfully implemented, but as it's been made pretty clear, the government is behind the curve as regards the way the technology companies operate. So I'm very wary that the government regulation would be proper and adequate to be beneficial to society while keeping the companies in check. So I think, therefore, the opposition's point stands, and I don't feel that you can say that the harm to society, which implies some form of regulation, is the right direction to take as regards regulation. Thank you.
Thank you all for voicing your opinions in this intimidating chamber. It takes a lot of courage, so please give a round of applause to all of our floor speakers. And with that, I now look to Sandeep Singh, who is from St. Hilda's College, as our final proposition speaker.
Thank you. Estelle said in her floor speech in the beginning that this debate has given her a lot to think about. And for many of you, this is the first Oxford Union debate that you're listening to. And it can be confusing, can't it? You listen to one speaker and you agree, and then you listen to the other speaker on the other side, and they give you something to think about too. That confusion is a privilege. Is the privilege that you seek to give your children when you send them to a university like Oxford? Is the privilege that you seek to listen to when you come to this debating chamber, listening to the likes of Malcolm X and Mother Teresa, who stood right here and thrived in that space of confusion? They thrive in that space of confusion to give you something to think about, to give you some viewpoints so you can make your own. And that privilege is what's being threatened by the tech giants. The tech giants are today telling you what to think about, how to think, and when to think it. Now, is that bad for society? Our team believes so. To determine whether that's bad for society, though, we need a moral standard to hold these tech companies against. Now, the opposition team has proposed a moral standard that's a utilitarian moral standard. They're simply putting things on a weighting scale and saying, if the good outweighs the bad, the tech giants must be good. My problem is, though, how are you going to measure the good and the bad? How are you going to tell a Muslim mother in India that the lynching of her kid is being measured against free Wi-Fi for hipsters in San Francisco? How are you going to tell the thousands of black youth in Trinidad and Tobago who did not get to vote in their last election that their voting rights are being compared to Kylie Jenner's selfies on Instagram? This is not measurable, the good and the bad. We propose a much simpler moral standard to hold the tech giants against. And it's so simple we don't even need to involve Immanuel Kant or any other philosopher. Would the actions of these tech giants survive a daylight on the front page of the New York Times or the Financial Times? Would they? If you bring these actions into the broad daylight, would it make us react? Would it make us angry? And we believe so. Sit down, Bala. You've spoken enough this year, my man. We're looking at this moral question from three different buckets, three different angles. The first angle that both Mina and Kyle have discussed have been the business side of things. The second bucket has been the data and privacy that Arjun talked about. And the last has been the behavioral influences that these tech giants have. Now, to start off with the business side of things that, Balakrishna addressed, he's looked at the 10K and all of that as he does best. We've addressed the tax avoidance of these tax giants. We've discussed the large market power that they hold and how they affect us through a pure business standpoint. And as MBAs, that's what we do best. But that's probably not the most relevant point here. The most relevant point here is the data and privacy. That's the most weightful bucket of all those three. And I have one rule in life. I always listen to David Graham when he matches his bow tie to his socks. And today is a day like that. Now, David Graham said, I have opted out of using some technology because I'm not comfortable giving away data like that. And that's the crust of this debate. That's what we're arguing. If even a speaker from the opposition is uncomfortable giving away his data to these tech giants, imagine all of us. And he's even arguing for them. Now, David also went on to say that we have regulation. We have regulation. The tech giants just don't follow it. Well, it should not be news to you that the UK Commission that looked at the Brexit vote concluded that the UK laws per now are not good enough to secure fair elections because of the tech giants. Meaning that the next time you go and put your vote in a ballot, you cannot be sure that the election was fair. Those are the laws that we're dealing with now. The regulators are not keeping up. Mark Zuckerberg is playing with the US Congress and the US Senate in a hearing because they just do not know what they're regulating. The data bucket also contains one other heavy thing containing of two words: Cambridge Analytica. And I'm sure you've heard about it, and I'm sure you're worried about it. Let me tell you one thing. Cambridge Analytica has 5,000 data points on every US voter. They can predict how you're going to vote. They can predict if you're going to get divorced from your wife. They can even predict the next time you're going to get a cup of coffee. And all they've needed to do that is a sample of the population of Oxford. That's the size they need to predict what 300 million people are going to do. And let me tell you another thing, and feel this. The co-founder of Cambridge Analytica, Steve Bannon, stood in this very chamber just a few months ago, just where I'm standing right now. Many of us in our class were sitting where you're sitting now, listening to him. This is very real. This is not an intellectual exercise we're doing. Steve Bannon was here. He is meddling with your elections. He is telling you how to think. It can't get realer than that. Now, when I was younger, my mom always used to tell me that you should be wary about the company you keep. Because the company you keep is forming your reality. And your reality is forming you. Who is forming your reality for you? Cambridge Analytica is telling you how to think. They're telling you when to think it. This is a direct quote from one of the Cambridge Analytica executives. Data is like a boomerang. You throw it to us, and we throw it back to tell you how to think and how to see the world the way we would like it. If you are being just as disturbed and just as uncomfortable being told what to think, when to think, and not determining your opinions, please vote for the proposition today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. And now I'd like to invite Cassandra Sullivan from Linacre College to close for the opposition.
Long before I was a platinum blonde and had the credentials that Kyle mentioned, I was a brunette who was born and raised in rural Idaho. I was the first in my family to get an education and a passport and begin traveling the world. And the way I was able to stay connected with the people who matter the very most to me is from the platforms developed by these tech giants. And the able that I'm effectively able to do that is because of their power. My dad is able to watch on YouTube right now. Hi, Dad. Hope you're proud. My mother iMessaged me during Hillary to lift me up. And Instagram stories kept me close to my friend Taylor Swift all year. All jokes aside, every single day, we each consciously acknowledge and think about the harms of tech giants, yet we continually opt in. And like Sandeep mentioned, we do have privilege, and we have privilege to think about it. And I believe everyone here truly does think about it and still believe that the good outweighs the harm. There's been a scale that's been presented for today's debate, and they've told you that, sure, we acknowledge the benefits, but we just don't like the power. But you can't have the benefits and the effectiveness and the efficiency that you have without the power. So if they concede all of the benefits and we're weighing that on that scale, you have to recognize that this is how the system works and stands. So going back to that scale that Lakshika framed for us, we have three values that have been weighing and tipping on both sides. It's that relate to data privacy, behavior, and economic principles. The Proud team is really worried about data and privacy. I'm not sure what it is they have to hide. My guess is that Sandeep's upset that Cambridge Analytica didn't help him win the union election, and so he has something really against it. Bummer. However, even with these privacy issues, we recognize that most of the atrocities and crimes are also resolving that the tech giants themselves are victim of. They're not the culprit, they're not the one putting it out. Criminals are using the platforms, and the tech giants themselves are victim to the causes and the harms of that. So they have the economic incentive to manage the data better, to protect it better. Their self-interest self-regulate to improve it, which is why, which was never refuted, people trust their data more so with these companies than with governments. It was never acknowledged that the most harmful breaches of our generations didn't come from them, but from the NSA. This has never been acknowledged in today's debate and needs to weigh to help us understand and make sense of why we're comfortable buying an Alexa and letting her overhear that we need a new dress for another debate and then ads showing up on my feed. There's a reason we opt into the convenience, and there's a reason that we trust it. It's because we recognize that the system is set up to celebrate the security within it. The second point is that for behavioral. And it is important that we all acknowledge the dark side of the human condition when using any substance. We all know that sugar's not good for us, and it'd probably be better off if governments banned it, yet we don't want it regulated that way. The same way we generally opt and prefer to use WhatsApp over a WeChat system. We recognize and we want the freedom to use these, and we want the freedom to use them and self-regulate ourselves. And even when acknowledging the harms, which are important and need to be discussed, and it's so great that we're having this conversation, we still see that the positive outweighs the negative. We see a movement in wellness apps, in online counseling, in life-saving services for elderly on phones and through Alexa. And because of that, we also see that people have a voice. So when thinking of this does more harm than good, it's clear to us that it's more of a positive benefit than a negative. And lastly, and most importantly, that related to economic principles. Once again, what they brought up for tax evasion applies to all companies in our current economy, but they mentioned the scale of the tech giants. But the scale of the way in which they supposedly and do evade could be countered with the scale of corporate responsibility and social good that they do as a result of wanting people to buy into their products. It's unprecedented, the amount of services that they're able to offer and provide and donate. Imagine a world without the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Imagine it without the services outlined through all of our speeches that has weighed towards the opposition side for the good that it does economically. And if we want to break them up, we need to recognize that they are broken up. These are all competing with one another. Once one has a monopoly in the other starts buying up new spaces, and we've seen that and studied that all year. We have to realize that if we undermine and question and fear power of companies, then we'll cease to inspire innovation. That's one of the primary principles of the free market economy that works in our good. So, on the proposition side, we're able to weigh life-saving innovations. We're able to weigh connectedness like never before that's going to bond all of us as we spread out over the globe over these next few weeks to be able to unite our experiences, ventures, and our ideas. I'll happily invite the proposition team to throw their phones away as they walk out of the chamber today. But since they won't, and you won't, and we all won't, and we realize we consciously support the opposition side every single day, we get to recognize and embrace and think about the victim who now has a voice, the disabled who now have access, and this one's really hard to picture, but the entrepreneurial MBA who has an income because of supporting the opposition side. And for these reasons, you should vote for opposition. Thank you.
I thank Cassandra for her remarks. And now let's hear it for all of the speakers for an excellent debate. Very well done, everyone. Please stay seated for a few moments. I would like to invite Steve New, our judge, to come tell us about who you voted for and why. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm greatly honoured to be invited to participate in this wonderful debate, and I'd like to add my thanks to the work of the organisers and the participants who put a lot of work into this. And I've learned a great deal. What you've shown me this afternoon is that Oxford MBAs can prepare thoroughly, can contribute politely, and most crucially of all, can turn up on time, which, having taught you all at some point throughout the year, has been a wonderful surprise. We've heard compelling arguments on both sides this afternoon, and I'm led to think of 3 points, really. Firstly, our colleague in Oxford, Eric Beinhocker's definition of wealth is the ability to do stuff. And certainly on that score, the tech giants have been extraordinary contributors to human welfare. But I'm also drawn, I'm afraid, to the well-known and variously attributed aphorism that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And one of the interesting points I was surprised not to hear this afternoon has been about the ownership and control structures of these companies, which contributes the voting rights, for example, in Google and Facebook's case, into the hands of a tiny number of individuals. And that presents a challenge for all of us. My third thought, which is rather melancholy, is that over the last few years, many people who've cut their teeth in precisely this spot have been devoting themselves assiduously to diminishing the power of the one institution in the world which has proved to have any success in constraining the power of the tech giants, the European Union. So, overall, and for those reasons, I vote for the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And now I would like to invite Rupert Younger to share his feedback and his vote.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure as well. I'll echo Steve's comments. I would like to pass a motion that this particular debating chamber moves around 70 miles east and heads to London, because we need this type of debate in a more serious chamber. Congratulations to both teams. And that's enough on British politics. I thought the arguments were very compelling from both sides. What I heard from the from the proposition was data privacy, very coherent arguments. Addiction. I think this scale and addiction question is a really big one. I also heard this lack of choice argument, the fact that scale actually reduces our consumer choice. And I heard a very coherent argument about the lack of tax. And thank you also for Gio for the introduction of that brand new piece of information. On the opposition side, again, some very powerful, well-put arguments. We had innovation, no doubt, that the tech giants have been responsible for a huge amount of the good stuff that is really changing lives. I heard some great stuff around the social engagement that big tech has been able to engage in, and also some rebuttals around tax. I thought a very powerful argument put about the fact that tax is actually not a tech problem, it's a global problem. So, really good arguments from both sides. What I missed from both sides, I thought actually a real open door win for your side would have been AI. I would have thought that if you think about the entrenched power and the financial muscle that the big tech giants have got to put towards embedded AI, that's a very powerful argument. And I would encourage you all to read a book by Amy Webb at Stern at NYU called The Big Nine. It's a call to arms and a wake-up call about the power of big tech. What I was surprised not to hear on the opposition side was the platform neutrality argument. This idea that actually people are bad, not platforms. And that, I think, would have been a very powerful argument to have spent more time on. But at the end of the day, great arguments both sides. I'm afraid, actually, for the simple fact that data was used so much more by the for proposition and the introduction of further challenges around the 2 billion becoming 50 billion, which just reinforced your argument about power, I'm voting for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of our judges. And now I would like the audience to cast your vote. Please remove your bias, embrace free speech, and vote on who you think presented the best arguments. The door marked yays is for the proposition. The door marked noes is for the opposition. And please bend a knee and vote with your feet. We will be counting those votes presently. Thank you.
Well done.
We have to process them out first.
Yes, okay, we'll process them out. Yes. We're just processing out, so maybe come and chat to us afterwards.
Okay.
Good timekeeping, of course. No, I didn't get a chance to do my jokes. I got confused by the timing because I was like, oh, one bell means no. The really good one, the myth. Really good one. I had to look the one about like times when we question who we are after being like the hang. So like that one, worst co whatever, I didn't get to mention it. Oh well.